Welcome back. It's now time to talk tax. That's the man in charge of all the reforms in terms of fiscal and tax reforms in Nigeria, Taiwo Oyedele. And if you look at the document and some of the things they are proposing, they are quite brilliant at surface level or face value. It's whether those implementation will follow through to the letter. One of the highlights of his conversation with our colleague that people took out was a 10% increase in VAT in next few months, which is 2025. And may go up to 15% in 2030. But he gave an explainer that 97% of SMEs are being factored in such that there will be so much reduction to the point of zero, but they'll tax the people in the middle income and the other 3% as well as the very wealthy to make up for some of the reduction that they will be, to make up for some of the reduction for the lower ebb of the economy, taxing more of the people that have a lot of money and the middle class. The argument about middle class is also another question. That's why I've been joined in the program by the former chairman, Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria, Abuja District, Dr. Emeka Nwabuzo. Dr. Nwabuzo, thank you so much for coming on the program.
And thank you for having me.
My assumption is that you are quite familiar with the work of the Fiscal and Tax Reform Committee set up by the president, led by Taiwo Oyedele. And he has made some very strong proposals. If I understand him very well, it says things like VAT on essential food, health, education, transportation, and housing. The aspiration is to be literally zero so that they can tax other things from the rich and the wealthy as well as the middle class and a few percentage of the SMEs and all of that. I want you to help us break down some of the things you've observed and how this will work, because at the end of the day, it's about implementation, isn't it?
I totally agree with you. Well, we need to first of all look at the background issue on the VAT. What is value added? VAT is, we call it value added tax. And it's a type of tax that what we call consumption tax. Consumption tax is actually levied on value, that is added to goods and services at each stage of production. Now, the bottom line is that those that actually bear the brunt of VAT is the final consumers. Now, having laid that, historically, we started VAT in Nigeria in about 1993 during the regime of President, there's a military head of state, Ibrahim Badamos Babangida. And as at then it was implemented, we have it at 5%. Then in 2019, during the Finance Act, Personal Finance Act, it was increased to 7.5%. Now, basically, the primary objective of introducing VAT is to see how we can diversify government's revenue source, because there is so much dependence on issue of oil, So that is just issue on the background, historical review as to VAT. Now, coming back to the question you asked me as to the work that Oyedele is doing with the tax policy team, is a very welcome development. However, I do have my reservations. Like I told you, I stated that the VAT, being a consumption tax, is borne by the final consumers. Yes, they have tried to, make some incentives for the low-income earners, but it is very easy for you to pass burden of VAT. It's very, very practically easy because it's an indirect tax. So that is where we are going to be looking at it in that angle. How are they going to implement it in such that at the end of the day, these people you are looking at, these people you say you have been exempted from the bracket, will not be affected. So these are just my preliminary comments. Maybe as we go along, I will explain.
So let's build on that preliminary comment. Why are you worried that taxing the high end of the economy will eventually trickle down? Because he gave a scenario. He said not everybody will afford to go to, say for instance, you buy a sandwich in a regular restaurant that they are now trying to increase the turnover for people that should not pay VAT from 25% to 50%. So a regular restaurant. because your turnover or your sales in a year is not up to 50 million naira, you don't pay tax. So you don't pass on that consumption tax to anyone. But if you're eating that same sandwich in, say, Hilton or Sheraton or one of the big hotels, you have to pay because not everybody can afford to get to those places and the prices they put. So I want to understand why you are worried about how it will trickle down to the common man.
Hey, first and foremost is issue of price inflation. Now, you talk about the issue of sandwich, which you gave an instance. The question is, do we have a different market for every set of people? Do we have a different set of market? It's still the same general market. Now, you give an instance, okay, like transport computing, somebody having a sandwich there. In transport computing, is it only the big shots? Is it only the big guys we have there? There are other people that are there that equally works there, which are low or middle level workers. They still feed from there. And they will still be tempted to still buy those properties, even within their meager earning. So what I'm looking at it actually is from two things, or rather three. One of them is the issue of price inflation. Increasing VAT rates will definitely lead to increase in prices of goods and service. I will give you a takeaway from, for example, what is happening in the issue of fuel. Everybody now use excuse of fuel to increase their prices. Even ordinary keke, a small distance of about 100 meters that you can normally do before for 50 naira or 100 naira, they will not tell you it's 500 naira. Even Uber, for instance, where distances of 500 naira before are now going for 2005. So we don't still have a proper regulation in Nigeria. That is why I'm saying it is very easy, but implementation is going to be the problem. So if it's not well implemented, we're going to have serious price inflation. It is going to still go back to what we're trying to run away from, which is reduction in consumption. So because people are not going to look at what are those things. They are going to prioritize what they are going to consume.
Mr. Nwabuzor, so he said no VAT for basic food, including semi-processed, health, education, housing. Those are the things they are looking at because they feel that these are the things that take a chunk, maybe 80-90% of monies from the pockets of the average common man, which is why they are transferring it to the bigger boys. Allow me to use that word. So if you were to do some modification to this proposal that I said at surface value looks good, what modification would you propose? Because the way you're looking at it, you're saying if you increase VAT from 7.5% for people above 50 million as turnover, there is no way it will not trickle down in the entire economy. And they are trying to increase it to 15% even in 2030. So if you were to propose a modification to the, allow me to say, good intention, what will it be?
You see, I'm just concerned, where my basic concern is implementation. Because, for instance, now, how do we even determine those that are below 25 million threshold or 50 million threshold? We don't have accurate data to even deal with in the first place. If I said, just like you rightly used the word big boys, a big boys can decide to pretend to be a small boy overnight. If I'm having a business where I'm dealing with 50 million, I can decide to trickle it and probably use 2 or 3 other small businesses to make sure that none of them is up to 25 million. I might not be able to evade it at the end of the day. So we have a lot of basic issues, which is issue of data. If we have accurate data, it will be easy to be able to implement these issues, these recommendations very, very well. But as it is today, we are still going to have issues with implementation. But it's a laudable proposal. That is the truth.
Now, Mr. Nwabuzor, in protecting small businesses, following up on your worry that at the end of the day, final consumers will be affected, the projection is for 2025. And amid all of the other futuristic projections also about the potential reduction in the price of petrol, which pretty much also affects other aspects of the economy. Do you project that by 2025, small businesses, the real sector now, which is the backbone of the economy, really will also have that time for recovery, giving the projected reduction in the pump price of petrol and the fact that the implementation of this VAT will not commence until 2025?
The issue is we're working on assumptions, and these assumptions are not realistic. A lot of factors affect businesses in Nigeria. We look at, okay, like if you have asked me as of last year, I can't even predict that we'll be talking about dollar over 1,600 presently today. And if you ask those in the market now with anything, they will tell you dollar is high, exchange rate is high. You will now bring the issue of fuel problem added to it. So there are a lot of other issues, other factors that can definitely impair whatever you think that would have been savings to this informal sector you are looking at. They are going to affect their growth. They are going to affect their expansion to be able to bring them to the bigger level in which it's okay. They are now bigger boys. They will go into the tax net. So the economy itself, the reform should be holistic. This piecemeal approach is not going to be implemented very, very well, because we know ourselves in Nigeria. We know the way we go about our implementations. We have very laudable policies, very, very laudable policies, but at the end of the day, how do we implement it? The loopholes is so much. We don't have data, technological know-how, even information circulation. The awareness is still very, very low. These are factors that you cannot totally take away from when you are making those assumptions.
So what are your recommendations then in covering the loopholes and, according to the concerns of Nigeria, ensuring that the taxes collected really do get into the coffers of the government and corruption is eliminated in the tax collection process?
Okay. Well, when you're talking about issue of loopholes in tax collection, there is a whole lot of things to be done. First and foremost is issue of data that we're talking about in Nigeria. Today we talk about NIMS, we talk about BVN, we talk about, we don't have accurate data. That is one. Then two, the issue of deployment of technology and the use of it is another problem. For instance, now, if you go to FRS now, the way the tax promise is, the program is prepared, is so that even the interest and penalty on taxes alone is more than the tax liability over a period of 2 years. How do you manage that? How can a business cope with that kind of implementation? So that is another issue. Then talking about the issue, issue of loophole, then you talk about the fact that on a scale of looking at what the businesses are doing, how do we bring proper audit so that it doesn't stay so much of long time before audits are carried out? We are in a self-assessment regime where people file taxes based on what they have done. But by the time you leave out this issue of review or audit more than necessary, some FRS presently are doing about 6 year back audit, 4 years back audit. What is stopping them from doing audit on year-to-year basis? This can reduce the impact of what is it called? Issue of tax fraud, let me use it that way, or issue of the loophole within, so that the government can be able to have more tax collected, and not just collected, but collected accurately and on time.
And there's more to share, Mr. Nwabuzo. Let me just reel out some of the recommendations by the Committee on Fiscal Policy. Anyone earning about 1.5 million a month or less will see their personal income tax come down. Companies will have income tax rate come down also by 30% over the next 2 years to 25%. That's significant, and that's something to share, and will definitely reduce the weight on the pockets of Nigerians in this middle income cadre, don't you think?
See, that is the angle of issue of direct taxes. That is where we are heading to. When you have issue of direct taxes, this is what have serious effects on people's income. If we are looking at reducing direct taxes, good and fine. That is a welcome development because it's going to allow people to have more disposable income to be able to either for consumption or for investment, which equally have its own ripple effect on the economy. Because when people have enough disposable income, either in consumption or in saving, it is still good for the economy. But when so much is eroded from the hands of people, it's an issue. And that is why I talk about the issue of indirect tax, though it is one of the best ways for government to raise revenue, but the negative effect of it is high on the general public, knowing fully well that the final consumers are the ones to bear the brunt of the taxes at the end of the day. It's very easy to pass the burden of indirect tax.
Right. Right. So I'm thinking about the implementation of this. Well, if the president eventually approves it when he returns, things like removing the tax on food, raw food and semi-processed food items, on transportation. Some wonder, I hope the conductors and the bus drivers are in on this. The part about rent as well, wondering, okay, how would you know now? Get it, because the price of rent keeps going up. That's if they're not even charging for 2 years or more. So some of these things are still very gray, and it brings me to my question. Do you agree with these 2 points that have been made? First, Mr. Taiwo Idele says that over time, it's actually the poor people that have been paying taxes rather than the rich people. And he said that, you know what, it's time for poor people to take a break. And that's why they made the point about if you order a taxi, for example, you're probably rich, so that should be taxed. If you eat food in luxury places, that should be taxed. So do you agree with him that poor people have been the ones bearing the brunt of taxation in Nigeria rather than rich people? An example that I was told recently, local government in Ogun State, stopping, what's it called now? Dispatch riders, harassing them, now even stopping people with private vehicles, asking for this and that. When people are saying, well, how about you go to big companies, request for taxes rather than harassing people who are living hand to mouth? That's on the one hand. Do you also agree with Bill Gates that, tax collection in Nigeria is really low? So 2 people have made 2 different statements. Do you agree with them?
Okay. Yeah, you are talking about 2 things. One is the fact that issue of low tax collection. Then talk about issue of the fact that the informal sector they are be the one paying taxes, so that we should look at the big boys now to begin to pay taxes. Yeah, I totally agree with Taiwo. I totally agree with him. Why do I agree with him? You see, when you look at the issue of tax collection in Nigeria, yes, tax collection is low, but people are paying more. So there are 2 divergent issues. One is issue of tax collection. One of these is tax payments. Tax payment is high. I can tell you because Nigerians pay 3 different types of taxes. We pay the formal tax, which is what is recognized within the data in which they are using to measure the GDP. Then there's the informal tax and the implicit tax. These are taxes that people are paying that government do not have record of it. Just like you alluded to the state you mentioned, where they are even collecting taxes from wheelbarrow and the rest, wheelbarrow pushers and the rest. This set of people are actually paying, but the records are not there. So it's more or less something that are off the system. So how can you now use those as a measure for our GDP? Then talking about issue of tax collection, yeah, I agree that tax collection is low. Why is it low? There are a lot of reasons why it's low. There is issue of widespread tax evasion. There is the angle of lack of compliance. There is the aspect of limited tax education and awareness. All these things combined are one of the reasons why there is low tax collection. Like I said, there is a difference between low tax collection and low tax payments. I do not believe that there is low tax payment, but I strongly believe that there is low tax collection. Then the second aspect you said, issue of the lower people or lower cadre paying more tax. That is the truth.
Right.
The big boys are not actually paying tax. If you walk into Abuja today, look at all the mansions, look at all the estates that are there. Where did they get the funds to do it? It's not a poor man on the street that can be able to afford to build an estate. How this place is taxed? Have the income they use in building all those estates, are they taxed? That is where the big boys are out of the tax net. So they need to bring the big boys into the tax net and actually allow the poor ones to breathe, according to our president.
In fact, you took the words right out of Nigerians' mouth. Let the poor breathe, indeed. Now that petrol prices have gone up, you just wonder how much more Nigerians can take. So do you think that there should be any moral ground now to increase collection? Because whether you like it or not, and I need to make the point, when you focus on the rich people, there's a tendency for them to also mark up their own prices, you get, and you know how that ripple effect will affect everybody eventually. So at the end of the day, the poor will still be at the receiving end in some way, maybe not as much. So how much morality do you think this government has to look into the faces of Nigerians and say we want to collect more, when it looks like they've given 70,000 naira minimum wage and they are collecting it back with the increase in the price of petrol? So taxing them again when you've been collecting more. Do you think there's any moral ground? And I'm talking about morality here, for people to now say, okay, fine, I want to willingly pay tax.
You see, it's boils down to the question your colleague in the studio asked me earlier. We are just looking at issues very narrowly. We are looking at issues from just one perspective. I mentioned there are a whole lot of factors affecting business. I gave you an issue of forest that, as of last year, if you have asked me as a professional analyst that prices of value of FX will be about 1617 per dollar today, I would argue it with you. Then, if you talk about issue of petroleum, we are talking about, okay, if subsidy was removed, but I don't even believe that subsidy was removed, because as far as I'm concerned, I felt it's just a price increase, and that is what is going on now because prices continue to increase. Then, we now talk about issue of increasing taxes again. These are going to be so much burden on the businesses. So we need to look at issues from holistic perspective, not just on issue of taxes alone. There are other factors that are affecting business that if all the factors are okay, then we can consider issue of tax. But as we are talking about tax, there are other elephants that the taxpayers are carrying behind them. So it's huge. So that is another discussion that you need to look into when you are taking that discussion on issue of whether taxes should be increased or not. Then you look at the angle of implementation. Just like you rightly said, the big boys in the society, how much taxes are they paying? I make an instance about issue of properties. These people there's so much money within this sector. And these people that are using this money, have they paid the actual taxes? We are going after the little ones that are trying to make a living with their little earnings, with their little disposable income. But the big people that are actually having these funds, utilizing them carelessly and unconsciously, how much have they been into tax net?
Dr. Emeka Nwabuzo, I must thank you so much. I can see your concern, just like all of us have concern for the poor or the people that are not so, they have nots. Because it appears that everything rises and falls on the poor, however you look at it. And so, as a people, we must do the best we can to ensure that the poor really breathe. So we'll hold the president accountable to that statement that he made, because the poor have really, really gone through hell and warm water. So we must thank you, Dr. Emeka Nwabuzo, former chairman, Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria, Abuja District. Thank you for your insights on the program.
Thank you for having me.